Hello, everybody. How are you? This is Carlos Drexler here. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, evening, morning, from wherever you're connecting. We are going to be joined by two experts just in a minute. We're going to discuss the topic of player profiles and how that applies to scouting, recruitment, and football in general terms. So we have a pretty interesting chat that is going to take place over the next couple of hours. That is going to be open. It's going to be like a round table. And we invite everybody to join in to share your questions or your comments with us. And hopefully you enjoy and get to take something away from this time that you're going to spend with us at the Real Madrid Graduate School. The first guest that I would like to introduce is Mr. Ivan Kepchia. Ivan is the current head of recruitment. How are you, Ivan, of Hibernians? And a massive expert in general terms in everything that is from coaching to academy management to sporting direction. As on top of the role that he currently has, he had massive roles in Legia Varsovia, in Hajduk Split, and in Dinamo Zagreb, among many others. And right now we're going to talk about a lot of things. Surely Ivan doesn't want me to go over his very, very extensive curriculum because he's a humble man with a lot of knowledge and would rather have that knowledge. And to add to that, we're going to have Chris join us, Chris Dockery. How are you, Chris?
Hi guys, how are you?
So Chris is currently the head of tactical performance at Dundee United Football Club, but also has had extensive, very interesting experience in a wide range of areas, including Hajduk Split, doing a lot of things from being a part of the coaching staff to the first team to assisting or supporting sporting director as well as the academy. And also has been in China and in many other clubs in Scotland and the UK. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. So we're here to discuss player profiles, right? So let's just start from the basics. What are player profiles? It's a rather modern topic, but I think it's a rather simple one. How could you best define it? What can you tell us about the concept in itself? Ivan, let's start with you.
Okay, well, thanks again for the introduction and the opportunity to be here. It's always a privilege to be chatting at Escuela Universitaria Real Madrid together. And I'm glad that Chris has joined us as well, now part of the Scottish under-21 coaching staff as well. So, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss on this topic that I find also quite interesting and important in the world of football. You could say that now it's a hot topic and it has gone really into depth to define to details the qualities that players would have. But if we look a little bit back in the history of football, you could say that at the beginning everybody just plays football, and then we started to define it as defenders, midfielders, and strikers. And then we started to realize that some players who maybe have a dominant foot would play on one side or the other. So I think that player profiling started a long time ago, maybe just as the world is evolving and getting deeper in knowledge about everything. I think player profiling has gone into those depths as well, where a lot of components are now being analyzed, evaluated, and further defined in order to bring the right piece missing for your puzzle. I think that more and more of us are understanding that a collective sport as football is, and it's a collective success, but it requires a lot of properly moving pieces that are working well together. So to achieve synergistic effects, and rather than just have a group of individuals, you need to have the right piece of the puzzle. And I think that player profiling is part of that. And I think it will be interesting to discuss over the next minutes all of the details and intricacies that we as professionals have to come across when we're making decisions that sometimes are, really heavy choices in terms of achieving success, in terms of balancing budgets, in terms of creating value, etc., etc.
That sounds good. We're going to go naturally very deep and detailed into the player profiles in themselves and how to develop them and what is included within them. But before that, Chris, would you like to maybe comment on the scouting ideas and maybe general structures or models around it?
Well, I think Ivan described very well something that's happening in football. Football's becoming academic now as well. So in the last 10, 15 years, we see now university students are studying courses on football. Of course, we are here today, in this domain. But in the past, it wasn't like that. Coaches, scouts, they usually were former players. They didn't come from an academic background. It wasn't a situation where we broke down every component of football and studied in detail. And now that's changing. Now we're starting to look at every possession, every player, every decision, and we're trying to analyze everything with data, with the visual. So this is one change which is happening, and the player profiles and scouting is part of that. And actually, we think about player profiles for recruitment, but my first experience with player profiles was with the National Association when I was a coach, maybe 21, 22 years old. I joined the Scottish FA, and we had a Dutch technical director for the association, and he decided every team is going to play this way for the national youth teams, and every player in these positions has to be a certain profile. And actually, even for my education of the game, you start to call by number, number 6, number 10, number 7. So then you have a vocabulary. Then it becomes easier. If I want to discuss with Ivan and I say number 6, he knows what I mean. We can go into more detail. So it also becomes profiles become a framework to allow you to develop vocabulary, to develop a reference point, to delve deeper. And of course, with the national teams, we were selecting players for that. But with the clubs, then it becomes a whole nother layer because the scouting process becomes global for the big clubs, and thousands of players are considered.
That makes sense. I guess that from my experience, I could add that it's been around enough. It's the idea of player profiles is there even from a very intuitive perspective. From a scouting perspective, for example, in my experience at Getafe 4 years ago, it was just as simple as saying, well, we have a player, or this is a starting model of play, to be honest. This is a type of model of play that we have. These are the players that do well in that model of play. So considering the market strengths and forces and the way that it moves, well, we just needed to be on top of things, and in the idea that we might drop a player here or there and lose a player or sell a player or something, we would just need something that is close enough to that so as to be able to maintain the capacity for the model of play to work. I guess that it is that integrated into the whole activity, and it's not just restricted to the domain of scouting and recruitment. So this could be a topic that could go on for a long time, couldn't it?
Yes, of course. I think that player profiles has really become a consequence of other choices of strategic matter, a matter that belong to a club setting on the football side. So you mentioned style of play. So a style of play is something that is defined before player profiles. So you need a style of play, and that causes a certain player profile to establish itself as a need. Before you establish a style of play, you need to see what are the variables that will be influencing that style of play. So I, for example, come from Croatia, where we have a traditional style of play that is one way, and then I challenged myself when I went to Poland, where I worked for Legia Warsaw, where a style of play was quite different, and the abilities or to find specific players within that style of play were definitely limited. So I had to adjust myself and take what I thought was good football and what I thought was appropriate for that time and place. And then if there is a gap between those two places, what is appropriate for the place and what is a vision, you need to see whether do we have time and how long that time should be in order to bridge that gap. So before we define a style of play, we have to consider all of other elements that football is defining: culture of the country, how are they viewing football themselves? Another challenge that I have ahead of myself is now working for Scottish team Hibernian, right? So different type of football that is played, different than Poland, which was my experience, different than working in Croatia as well. So in that sense, I have a challenge as a head of recruitment to adjust in finding players that could raise the bar, bring more quality to the team at the same time that can adjust to the league, adjust to the style of play, and be able to handle the qualities of that league in particular. So anyways, many elements are there that shape the style of play, and then style of play defined shapes potentially a system of play, and within that system of play, together with the style of play, player profiles come maybe as an outcome, and that outcome now becomes body of work for somebody like myself in the recruitment area that now needs to navigate the scouting system and the recruitment process in finding those player profiles.
Chris, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of interesting things Ivan said, and we should also make it clear that some clubs don't have player profiles, and some clubs will operate. They will look reactively on the market. This player is available. He's a good player, or he has sell-on potential, or he has a lot of experience. Okay, he wants to join us. We can afford him. Let's bring him in. The head coach now, or the first team manager, his job is now to build the system around the best players available for the team. And some clubs have been successful. You for sure can be successful in this model when you have an adaptable coach. It seems though that the trend is going towards having a game idea, a DNA of the club, and then building the player profiles as the next step. We should also consider, for example, if you're in a club like we were, myself and Ivan and Hajduk, where we built a lot from the academy players, then first we also have to consider what type of players do the academy produce. Genetics, culture, just in your under 19s, maybe you have 3 players who are fast, dynamic, but in the under 17s, maybe they're small, technical. All of these things need to be considered because you're building the first team squad. If you're including those players, then maybe you have to base style of play around what do you have in the club already. But then also, if you have a lot of one type of player from the academy, then maybe you have to prioritize to buy a different profile to balance the squad as well. But I think one of the reasons why clubs are going to a more strategic destination is long-term strategy is helping the club to be stable and successful financially and also on the pitch. So in the past, when, for example, in the British model, the first team manager will come to the club, say, I want these 5 players, and then the directors of the club are going to buy the players, but then the next manager is coming and wants to change the style and wants to change the 5 players. Then, for example, I have in my notes here, in Liverpool FC, when Kenny Dalglish was the first team head coach, they paid 41 million for Andy Carroll and 8.5 million euros for Charlie Adam, both in euros. So one player is tall, number 9 target player. The other player is dead ball specialist, good in crossing the ball, creating assists for a tall player. The next season, Brendan Rodgers comes to Liverpool. They sell Andy Carroll for 17.5 million, and they sell Charlie Adam for 6.2 million. So immediately, Liverpool is losing many millions of euros. Then they have to buy extra players to fit the new system. And this is an unstable way to organize a club. And that's why if you start first with the game model, then you have the profiles of players, then the head coach that you choose must fit the profile of players and the profile of the club that you have, so that you don't have this constant changing and financial problems which come from changing all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, the player profiles are always mostly about the actual game aspects of each position, right? But we have been talking about culture, about club identity, the way that football is viewed. So are there any types of contents within a player profile which are not actually game specific? So for example, you were mentioning the example of looking at how the young Croatian players you had coming up, Hajduk had this particular way of being, regardless of how they played or regardless of their position. They had this set of characteristics that are more cultural, that are more identity-based. One could start creating player profiles out of those, right? That's what I refer to as the general model of player, which comes above the player profiles. It's something that's generic. It's something that would encompass pretty much all of the players or a good bunch of them. And maybe it's something like aggressiveness or having a particular way of living or having a lifestyle that is similar to the one that the club has and the people have in terms of mentality. What do you think is about that type of thing? What do you think is more relevant? Is it something that is important to have as a starting point before we go into specific game aspects that would be determined by the positional requirements?
I would say you have each environment that has its own circumstances and reality. Reality of FC Barcelona was that they were missing a wide player who was good one-on-one, and they went to buy Neymar for 90 million euros, right? And FC Barcelona at that point in time was able to allow themselves this type of a luxury to add to the squad something that maybe it hasn't produced internally. Our experience maybe is the opposite in Hajduk, where we were in a moment at the club in which we needed to refinance and restructure our budget, and we needed to open gateways for young players. And we were not able to be this deterministic about what we want, but we had to look at who are the best 1, 2, or 3 guys or 5 from the academy that deserve an opportunity to take them to preseason. And then we allowed for the coach to be able to differentiate and build a game around their qualities. So I think that you're definitely right that a basic generic concept of a good footballer, which obviously, again, is not the same everywhere in the world, but in the perception of that specific environment, of that specific club, is definitely the most important underlying factor. If you have the privilege that you're able to invest and look internationally and scout abroad and bring players with specific qualities you're looking for, I would say that is definitely a super important aspect, as Chris mentioned, the case of Liverpool, having a strategy many years ahead where you're planning and tying players to yourself with 5-year contracts. Therefore, you need to have a long-term strategy and vision and idea about how you're going to do it. If you're a smaller club that is maybe in second division of Croatia or some smaller country like that, you are going to be facing maybe that reality of who do we have, who we are able to get that lives regionally, that will adapt quickly, that is going to be financially affordable, that wants to be here, that has the right passport, etc., etc. These are all elements that then come into play. We speak about football qualities, but I mentioned now one that is very important in scouting and recruitment, and that is passport, player passport. Just because of the restrictions that different leagues have imposed on players and building a roster, how many internationals you're able to have, that itself can define a lot of things in your choices and how you're doing things.
Yes, I agree totally. And you just mentioned something that to me is really important. We have gone far away from the actual game, and we have discussed the way a player is and his potential market value, and just as much any other legal, financial situations that could come around the capacity of signing that player. Are those topics something that go directly into the player profile, or that just they are around and they are, of course, considered within the scouting efforts and just, assessed once we have this sporting side of things? What would you do? Would you just include everything within the one player profile type of document, to call it something, or would you just have different areas where you know that eventually the non-football things are going to have its effects as well?
Well, let me give you my specific experience at Hajduk. When I first arrived to the club, we had a scouting team that was doing a very good job in analyzing players. And I asked them, "Hey guys, we need a striker. You know, you've been here. I joined only mid-December, in the middle of transfer window, so something that I was not able to prepare. So I had to rely on the efforts of the people and knowledge that they have gathered months beforehand." In player recruitment, and they tell me, "Oh, look, we have a fantastic striker. He is, this guy. He plays in Switzerland. I watched him twice live. All of us like him in the scouting team, etc." And then I said, "Oh, great. Do we know the cost?" And they're like, "Oh, no, no, no. It's not part of our job to know the cost." Well, it was part of my job to know the cost. It was part of my job to know whether this was a reality. So within 15, 20 minutes, we call the club, we find out that this player is worth 3-4 million on the market and definitely out of our reach. So in that moment, it became obvious that the scouting team was not working in synchronous with the club policy, and or at least the one that was given to me by our president and board. So I had to put them to work for us. So rather than having a scouting team that looks for the best possible players without financials, we had to put it in reality that the financials determined which players we're going to be scouting, because those are players that actually could be our players. Players that are worth 2, 3, 4 million at that point in time were not our reality. And therefore, it was a wasted resource from my club to be sending the scouts over there, giving their time, allocating their short amount of time to a specific player that is not within reach. So the other elements that you described, them besides football, are very, very important in scouting, and they need to be taken into consideration as one of the first elements. Financial restrictions are one of them. Maybe another one is the player passport, which we mentioned, because of restrictions of each league that could be having. Sometimes passport is a preference. You say, "Hey, we're a club that builds players and sells them on. It's better if there is a player with a European passport because the market is bigger." But a better player, maybe that doesn't have a European passport, still has markets internationally and within Europe, just smaller. So then we have to really measure which one is better, considering the lack of a European Union passport. The same thing is with the financial investment. Is this player better? There is this investment, but maybe has a higher roof, or we can't go that far, and now we just have to take somebody that is more affordable. So those two elements are maybe the most prevalent. Maybe as we go into deeper about player profiles, often we think of player profiles of footballistic qualities. What can he do with the ball? Which position he plays on the team, etc. But when we were at Legia, we were looking for a central defender and seeing a lack of leadership within the squad. One of the first things that we put, captain profile. And that captain profile needed to speak at least English and have that personality that brings into the locker room something special, what we needed in that sense. So we've put that quality that is within football, however, also something not very commonly referenced and mentioned as the number one priority. And then last thing maybe that comes to mind now is also the age. Often we discuss whether, do we want an experienced player? Are we already an experienced team and we need younger players? Do we need somebody who is mid-ages? Because in our back line, we have a 20-year-old and a 33-year-old. So it would make sense that a third component to the lineup would be maybe somebody in their maturity. So these kind of things, they have to go into your scouting and recruitment process. Otherwise, you could be wasting a lot of your time into players that are very good players, but are financially unaffordable, cannot be registered because they're outside of the perimeters politically, etc., etc.
Yes, no, I agree 100%. And there's actually a different way of organizing the squad as well. Don't just collect a bunch of positions on the field as per the system of play. You can also classify players based on age and experience, based on the role that they have in the dressing room, based on the star status, as some people want to call it. And that's also some some of the structures that are important when you're developing a squad, especially a first team squad. And with everything that you mentioned, I was wanting now to go into more detail of how player profiles are created, how we develop them, how we structure and design the content. But before that, Chris, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I think it's just important to say that we have to also consider different clubs have different strategies on how to scout, and we have to consider the strategy of the club. So, for example, like one famous sporting director in Spain, Monchi in Sevilla, he is scouting with the net and gross tracking. That this is the terms he is using, but we are doing something similar here in my club. And basically, what it means is, for the first part of the year, you are just trying to see what's going on around. Who are the talented players in this leagues in these positions? Maybe sometimes a player is outside of your financial capacity, but later he goes to the next club. He doesn't play in the first team. He gets injury, but you know everything about the player. And later you sign the player. I think Monchi mentioned, for example, Canute was one of the players he signed after he went to a different club and then came to Sevilla. So the other way, which Ivan is mentioning, is probably more efficient, where you have the profiles in the beginning. You say anybody who's above 28 years old or above this salary or not in this nationality, we don't even watch the player, and then we focus more detail on a smaller group of players. And this allows you to be more efficient and to go into more detail on those players. So there are pros and cons. Are you trying to get the best possible player, or are you okay to miss some players but be more efficient in your work? So depending on the strategy of the club, then we'll decide whether we're using profiles as a beginning and as an end. Similarly, will depend on the role of head coach. So in some clubs, the head coach will be the main person in deciding which players to buy. So if the head coach is deciding, then the head coach will be the person developing the profiles, and this will be more relevant when you're net and gross track, because if the club is looking at a lot of different types of players, if you change the head coach, you have options available no matter what style, no matter what system they want to play. But if it's a different model where the club is deciding the DNA, the game idea, the head coach must fit within those parameters, then probably it makes more sense that the sporting director, the head of recruitment, is deciding this is the type of right back, this is the type of number 6 that we sign, and maybe they're just giving the head coach, for example, here is the top 5 options. Let's discuss, what number 1, number 2, number 3, which player we should try to recruit. So the strategy of the club is important, and which direction you will take the profile.
Yeah, I agree totally, definitely. So I'm thinking we should now discuss a bit more in depth how to develop and what to consider when we develop player profiles. And after that, maybe we can go and discuss how we apply it on a day-to-day basis, how the actual scouting activity is done and how that is seen. And for all of you guys out there, we're getting your questions and they will be answered 100%. We're going to find the right moment because we believe that some of the questions that we're getting will be actually coming up. So bear with us and we'll get there, yes? But to get it started, right? So what would you say about the design and the development of player profiles? So for example, who does that job? Right, and of course it depends on club structure. How do we go about organizing and creating something that then we can use and say, hey, we have this tool, it's central to our scouting efforts, these are player profiles. How does a club go about
that? I can maybe just describe a couple of things from experience that have made sense to us, the way we've done things. So in my last job in Hajduk, knowing we have a very good academy that is producing high quality players for many years, the first thing was always to look inside. Obviously not having also financial ability to be very active on the market, we had to look internally also for that reason. So you have two very, very strong reasons that shape your strategy. So it's when you're defining strategy, you have to know that strategy is defined by your circumstances. So our circumstances were such that looking internally was smart and was actually the most important. And in some positions, you immediately see that there is quality within the B team or the under 19, somebody that is close to ready, and you're looking for the right moment to join first team for a training, or maybe go and give them opportunity for a friendly match, or playing in a cup match, or within a lower tier team, just so that you can see internally what you could solve immediately. Obviously, those are players that are most valuable. They are domestic, you know the character, they're immediately integrated, they're dreaming to be promoted, they're financially cheapest in terms of a budget. So it makes most sense to do something like that. So our first conversation was with the academy director and his staff. What is the most, who are the players that we see ready? And really, I expect as a sporting director from the academy that I have somebody kind of knocking on my door and saying he's ready, you should see him. I prefer this type of energy coming from the academy, because they are the ones who are supporting the growth of that player. On the other hand, it's the first team coach that is the one that will be playing them. So we need to define that strategy as well. And seeing, obviously, you have to choose a coach. It's a coach profile, something that maybe we don't have time to discuss today, but you have to choose a coach that is particular to that strategy. Because if you are bound to where we were bound in Hajduk a year and a half ago, was financial restraints, pushing a lot of players from the academy. Our first conversation with the coach was, are you ready to put players from the academy up and promote them and push them? So these type of conversations need to happen first. When you establish a squad, obviously always looking to strengthen the squad as much as possible. And if you're not able to determine the player profiles with the coach, you have to push that narrative until you get to the actual point, because that takes a consequence on the jobs of many other people in scouting and recruitment. Often you have coaches that are dead set on specialists. So I think that Jose Mourinho is one of them who says, I always prefer specialists in specific roles, and will take 22 players that are covering, a right winger who can play right winger and right winger, and that's it. Whereas you have maybe Guardiola's approach, who says, give me players that are multifunctional, because I can adapt them to suit the specific formation that I will adjust in a particular game or in particular competition. So you have this type of coaching mentality, and you cannot say one is better than the other or exclusive. You just have to say, my club and my reality is better geared to this one, or we are better geared to this one. So it definitely has to come with the head coach of the first team. Chris mentioned, in the UK, the tradition is that there is a manager, and the manager defines that role himself. Often in my work so far, we didn't have this system. We had a system in which the sporting director was above the coach in the hierarchy of the club. But I always strived to work together to see how we can bring to what the coach needs and define together a specific type of player that we're looking for, and something that will fit within the team, that it will be a successful signing eventually for all of us. Often, I think maybe Italy has the opposite culture of the UK, where the sporting director is quite different minded than the first team coach, and often brings the best players possible, gives to the head coach and says, hey, run with it. Difficult to say one is right, the other is wrong. It's just a matter of applying the level between those two endpoints, what is appropriate for our environment today where we're located.
So it's, from what you're saying, I gather, and I agree with the idea that we have to start the broad club strategy. And realistically, as we go little by little into the more specific aspects of football and the style of play and the coaching and so on and so forth, we will end up with the player profiles. Is it fair to say that there is nothing that follows player profiles in terms of the description of what we need from players in terms of scouting and recruitment, or would there still be something else that goes another step other than just going out and looking for the players?
Well, I can give an example now of my club, because we have a situation where so my job is quite unique, probably compared to many football clubs, because we have a sporting director. He's not like a technical director. He was a former agent and former businessman, so he's dealing with the budgets and negotiations. We also have a head coach, but in Britain, the head coach has a little bit more power over which players to buy, to sell. And I came to work with the head coach as part of his staff, but also the club wanted me to work for the club, not for the head coach. So I'm almost half part of the first team staff and half part of the sporting director staff. So I work week to week on the game idea for the first team. I implement the game model for the academy, or I design the game model for academy to make sure everything is consistent. But then also I'm trying to keep a medium-term focus for the club. So if we change the coach, he is successful, he goes to a better club, then we have a plan for the new coach to come in. So we are trying to balance the short term with the head coach and the long term. So for example, the number 6 position, the defensive midfield position, we call it number 6, maybe number 4 in some countries in Europe, but the position in front of the defenders. And our club in the past, our scouts, the head of recruitment, the sporting director, they thought of this position as a guy who's winning the ball. Okay, so a guy, when you don't have the ball, he is good in getting the ball back. Technical ability is not so important, but they thought physical strength, tackling, aggressiveness, these type of attributes. With the new game idea, which I'm trying to bring some of these ideas to the club, I wanted to bring a ball-playing midfield player. So we want the profile of the number 6. But then, it's okay, so we say this is the profile, this type of player. But then the scouts are used to looking at something else. So even though they have the profile, they still have to figure out, what does this profile really look like? Because, Xavi is a ball-playing midfielder, Busquets and Iniesta, but none of them are the same as each other. So the same in Real Madrid, you have Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, Casemiro, but they're all different. So in this initial phase, I had to actually go and try to find video examples of players and what kind of attributes, what kind of behaviors they showed in the game for this position. And I also had to try to find players who were within our budget in terms of salary, in terms of contract expired or low fee for transfer, so that I could give the head of recruitment a realistic 3 or 4 examples. These are players in our budget who do the things that we want the number 6 player to do in this model of play. But that's many discussions. We had discussions, for example, because in Scotland, we typically don't have this type of midfield player. We have, of course, Billy Gilmore now is quite famous in Chelsea, but historically, this is a new profile. So our head of recruitment was asking me, for example, we can find a number 10. He played in one of the biggest clubs here in Scotland. He is now in the 30s. If we convert this number 10 to number 6, but he can pass the ball 30 yards, 40 yards, he can open a defence. Can we teach him the defensive position? Can we convert the player? So we had a lot of discussions about what is available in the market for us, which type of player can perform this role, and then maybe you have to be a little bit creative as well. So sometimes it's not so straightforward that you just say, we want this type of player, and then the scouts are going and bringing the names.
If I may add, just to his example, maybe you're defining a style of play that you have a playmaking number 6. Often, a part of the strategy could be to get another number 6 because you really want to double up positions of the same profile. So when you're subbing, you have 1-for-1, same exact playmaking number 6. On the other hand, you could choose to do the opposite and say, okay, we have a playmaking number 6, but we might need a different profile, playing maybe against bigger opponents, playing against European League competition. So in that sense, maybe you're looking to do exactly the opposite. Let me define the profile that we need is a sub number 6 who is more of a destroyer type, somebody that does better against the ball versus on the ball, if we may call it that way. So when you're defining something, you're often taking into consideration your playing style, but you're also looking into consideration what are the elements that you have within the squad that can maybe be rotated and jumped in. What are maybe the qualities that you don't have to add specifically to the type of problems that you want that player to be solving for you.
Yeah,
Yes, totally. Go on, Chris.
No, just to add to Ivan's point then, so just to go into a little bit more detail about so once we defined this, like Ivan said, we actually had this ball-winning number 6, so we said we wanted the playmaker. Then when we were actually defining, so the real process for me in the last couple of months, trying to find video examples of what type of things. So for example, for me, the ball-playing 6, I wanted somebody who's agile. So for example, if somebody's agile, that means they can turn 180 degrees quickly. Probably they're going to be a smaller player. If the club is used to thinking about the number 6 being tall, strong, immediately there's a difference. But then I have to find examples why smaller can be better in this situation, because pressure is coming, they can move out of pressure. It's difficult to press when you can turn in a tight direction. Then we're looking for somebody who can take the ball under pressure, who wants to take the ball under pressure, somebody who will go between the opposing strikers and midfield players, take the ball with 4 players around and always keep the ball. Somebody who will make the right decision between when to keep the ball for the team, build a rhythm, move the team up the field in a structure, and then on the right moment, try the killer pass beyond the defense, or try a diagonal ball to make a 1v1 situation on the wing, and the technique to execute this pass. Then on defensive phase, our ball-winning midfielder who we had was more of a tackler, one-to-one duel. But for the playmaking profile, because he's a smaller player, he doesn't have this quality. So we're looking for somebody who can read the game, somebody who's positioning. For example, if the opposing midfield player has the ball, he's in the position between the ball and the strikers, so he's stopping the pass going in. Somebody who will sometimes leave a small gap to a player. The pass is coming and he's intercepting the pass. Then we can immediately start a counter-attack. So even though he's not tackling, he's not physical, I had to find real examples of players doing this type of actions. And then we tried to find, okay, you'll never find one player when you have no money who can do everything that you want. But then you're trying to find one who can do, a few of those things well. And then that's when you narrow your list. Okay, we have 3 guys. Let's go to the head coach. Which one do you like?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and I agree 100%. And that shows how complicated it is. Yes, Ivan.
If I may interrupt, in a hypothetical sense, Chris is describing a different profile. You have to know that if you are a coach or if you're a sporting director and you have a strategy on a style of play that you have in mind, but you're looking to change the number 6 profile because you're changing the style of play, you have to be aware if the current number 6 is maybe your captain, is maybe 30 years old and 2 more years of a contract, then that complicates things, right? Because now you have to see that is a real world problem. How do we now have an idea and merge it with our reality? And if in our reality, we have an important guy in our club, maybe the fans love, maybe the players respect and is an extended hand of the coach, but doesn't fit the playing style, we have to find ways, how are we going to integrate or change the role of this player, maybe play with 2 6s, I don't know, could be that changes a little bit of the strategy and style of play in order to fit the player that is an important part of the locker room and that is important part of the club, has multiple years of contract on him that we want to keep, respect, etc. So it's not that easy to disregard other qualities that are there that players bring to the table when you're looking to replace them or add to them, because you have to be accepting, okay, how is this, I don't know, imaginary example, 31-year-old captain except now being benched just because a new coach came in, younger player that is a different profile that fits better the style of play. And if you have the right character that is ready to adjust and fight for his position, that's one. If you don't, then you have a problem of a different nature. You have to try to solve in another way.
Yeah, totally. And it also goes in line with the comments by Ramandeep. I hope I'm saying that name right. I'm sorry if I'm not. And that is true. Sometimes you have to also factor in player characters and the player styles and see who plays better with whom. Because in the end, we do have all of these micro areas within a style, within a model. And now, especially here in Spain, it is very common to speak of the way that players relate to each other on the pitch, not just socially, but the way that they find each other on the pitch and the way that they organize themselves. So there are definitely a lot of things that we have to factor in when we develop player profiles. So my question is, we can all be a part of a recruitment section or a scouting and recruitment section of a club, right? And we might know exactly what we're talking about because we see each other every day, because we all know the team that we're working with and the circumstances that we're in. But shouldn't we have documents? Shouldn't we have something in written where we are able to come back to consult just in case, or update, or so on and so forth, which then leads to a problem. If we should be writing all this down, if we should be saying for this and this and that position, or for this and this and that type of player, a captain or experienced player or a young player, and we have all these sets of characteristics and features and qualities that players might have or should have so that they can fit our club identity, our style of play, our specific model of play as per the current coaching staff. So how do we go about organizing all of that? So I can tell from experience and from general basic adaptations, you have the two types. One is where people just focus on the specifically important aspects. They don't organize necessarily too much. And like you guys have been saying, sometimes we need a number 6 that does this, this, and that. 3 things, 4 things, they're very important. That's all the information that we need. In other cases, especially here in Spain, we go with a lot of documents. We use massive level of detail. We start by some physical characteristics, mental, psychological aspects that could be specific to the player or could be regarding the player within the stressful situations of playing games. And then, of course, we go into all technical, tactical actions as per the model, not just the model of play, but the game phases, as in what the player does in attacking phase, in defensive phase, and in the 2 transitions, and even so in dead ball situation. So which one is the type, if you have another one, then that's even better. What is it that you recommend the most? To have a lot of detail and a lot of clarity, or to keep it broad and very simple, very direct in terms of what is most important?
I would say that the most important thing is have an idea and know what you're doing. And that would lean to having a set idea, a lot of detail. On the other hand, I would be the first guy to say, don't be a slave to that idea and that detail, because when reality hits in, you often find that it's impossible to encompass all of it and find the exact appropriate thing, unless you are the PSGs of the world, in which you can just buy whatever you need. So whenever you're doing some planning and you're dealing with human beings, you have to understand that situations change, ideas change, emotions change, and a certain level of adaptability is very much needed. I'll give you an example of a team that I had recently spoke to, maybe 10, 15 days ago. And I asked them what positions you're looking for in the market as part of our normal conversation with a colleague, sporting director. And he said, we need this type of a left back. We need an inverted winger on the other side. And we need a 6'8" profile in the midfield. And then he also said, but we're also open to something special on the market, right? So his reality is that he has a set idea. On the other hand, he has to be open if you can find a number 10 who all of a sudden, or maybe not a number 10, but a very high level player for that club that maybe would be otherwise too expensive, that on the last day of the transfer window, terminates his contract with the club. He's looking for an opportunity to play, where you would really be ignorant to turn down the opportunity to bring player of such a high quality into your squad, and then find a way to integrate that special player into your team because he's coming from a higher level. And I can tell you that many clubs now, past the majority of the transfer windows internationally have closed. Right now, it's a free agent market where some of the players who were expecting a new contract, maybe now they're willing to settle for half the wage that they were asking before. And before September 1st, they were not a realistic target for your team. Now they're more willing to accept offers from a club like yours. And it could be a special ad, and many clubs have part of their budget allocated to say, hey, we're going to be adding two players post window as free agents because they're going to improve the quality of the team significantly. But there you have to be a little bit more flexible because you cannot specifically define and expect you're going to actually find that player in the free player window. So in that sense, I would say that having a healthy base between those two is important. By my personality, I'm a structured guy. I like clarity I like to know what I'm doing and challenge myself when I'm not following that thread. On the other hand, I try to make myself flexible enough to deviate from that course if it's needed because it makes sense. We don't hear you.
Yes, now I had a little issue there. In this regard, there's a very interesting question by Shashwat, who asks if or how adaptability is factored in, as in being capable of adapting to our club, our model, on top of his ability or as a player. How does that come in, and to what extent is that something valuable?
Go ahead, Chris, if you want.
No, I just wanted to say something that's really important to say. I think we can talk a lot about every detail of what we want to analyze, including adaptability, mental, physical, technical. In reality, most clubs are running with a very small, recruitment department. Apart from the top 1%, they don't have a lot of money on the market. They are working in very reactively. The offer is coming for the goalkeeper. We didn't plan to sell the goalkeeper, but now we have to. So now we have to buy a goalkeeper. Oh, we don't have any goalkeepers. Who is available? This is the real world situation. So, for example, something like adaptability for sure will be, I think, something that every club should consider. I just want to say that every sporting director will say they do consider this, but in reality, in the real life, they are making the fast decisions very instinctively a lot of the time. But I think it's also probably one of the hardest things to understand how a player will adapt, because even in the same, for example, Ivan was working in Dinamo Zagreb before. I was visiting him there several times, and then we worked together in Hajduk. And for a foreign guy, Croatian football is Croatian football, but in reality, Hajduk mentality, style of play, cultural preference is opposite from Dinamo Zagreb. Dinamo likes more possession-based. Hajduk wants high intensity. So even within the same country, you then have to adapt to the regional culture. Then you have a locker room environment. Within your locker room, do you have guys who are experienced players who are very accepting? For a young guy, they are welcoming. Is it a very hard environment? For example, many Scottish clubs in the past, it would be like they will try to bully the young players or the new signings because they don't want to take possession. Then you can only sign a guy who's very mentally strong or physically strong, that they can stand up to this. So you have to understand all of the dynamics and then try to choose. But it's also one of the hardest things to predict and to know. Whereas what we can do, we can look at, for example, video and see the player can put the cross on the box very accurately 8 times out of 10. So we know he's good in crossing the ball. But these other things are something we will always try to guess. But I think probably none of us really have the true answer, no matter how much research we do, until we see the player and that dynamic.
Yeah. And if I may add to this, in the last job that we had, we brought a couple of players, and we were all sure, scouting, recruitment, coaching staff, both directors at the club who deal with the sports segment, that we are bringing the best player to the club. And on paper, in the best years, the best season of his life behind him, stable character references that came from different sides were all very positive. And the player came to the club, showed great things within the first month. People were awed that we brought in a very good player. And something happened, which we can't describe today, that he just drowned, somehow disappeared. And it's impossible to put a finger to it and say he is, not getting along with the locker room, because that's not what it is the case. He's enjoying where he's living. His family situation is unchanged, at least to the knowledge of us, etc., etc. So sometimes you're having a risk when you're bringing a new player in, and you try to mitigate that risk by exploring as much as possible. As a sport director, I always try to put myself to have the most possible information that I have on the character of the player as well, and to find information from teammates, past coaches, current past sporting director, different agents, rumors. There's even companies that do background checks. I remember when we were in Warsaw, we actually bought a background check on a specific player. If he goes on international duty, does he come back on time, or is he late 24 hours because he needed to party somewhere in Paris or where there is a good hub? You know what I mean? So these are all realities that you are always trying to mitigate risk of when you're bringing an unknown person into the club. And you do a lot of it, and on 10 players, probably 8 you're not going to miss. If you don't do any of it, probably you're gonna miss 4 or 5 rather than 2. So there is always an X factor, which is the element of the human being, which is unknown, how they're going to fit within the environment, etc. But you do have to do as much research as possible, take into consideration language barriers. If this guy comes, let's say I spoke with a player from Spain, I get on fine with Spanish, but I'm not going to be with the team. Who do we have within the team that can help this guy? Oh, we have an assistant who played in Spain. He can make sure that this boy gets all the information that he needs. So that was a very, very important piece of information. At the same time, could be a French player. We don't speak French. Nobody within the locker room speaks French. We have a higher risk of somebody not adapting just because the language barrier is hard. Now that I work for a Scottish team, we talk about adaptability to weather, adaptability to the climate, right? Because we have heard multiple times from players that have been in Spain, went to play in the Premiership in England, in the biggest clubs around, and depressed because they couldn't handle the weather in England, regardless of playing in the top of the world. Something was missing part of their life or part of their family life, not even necessarily their own, that you have to also take into consideration adaptability to other circumstances like culture, like weather, language, and you do as much as you can to mitigate those risks so that they diminish. Sometimes you just have to accept you are helpless beyond the point.
Now that's so tremendously interesting, because we're not talking about player profiles. We're talking about signing players. The beauty of being recruiters, right? So
yes.
This brings me to that question. So where does the actual player profile come in? I mean, when we're talking about the scouting efforts, we know we have them. We know that we need them in order to look at potential suitors for the positions that we may need, that we might have needs coming up. But of course, within the forces of nature that the market brings, that the sport brings, and the human nature involved in it as well, where does it actually fit in, or what specific points of task, let's call it like that, where we, now day-to-day task environments in a sporting director office, where do you say, now let's go and apply the player profile to a job
First, it's an ongoing thing of defining your player profile. I think that part of the conversation with the coaching staff has to be on a daily or weekly basis at minimum. You have obviously transfer windows that define the moments in which you are able to add to your roster, and you have a conversation with your head coach and you express your opinion because you're a little bit more withdrawn, you're a little bit more outside of the team. The head coach is immersed within the team, and he maybe knows some of the things internally. How does somebody fare within the locker room versus what you know from the outside. And having this conversation almost on a daily or on a weekly basis is very important, because you have to define then what the rest of the team is going to be looking for. So maybe at the beginning, let's say we joined Hajduk in mid-December. It was immediately that conversation. Did you watch the squad so far? Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Okay, great. We have opinions on several of the players. Some we think don't belong to the level, okay, or don't belong to the style of play that we're looking to go. Is it possible that we are able to change some parts of the squad? Yes. Okay, great. How much can we change? Well, we don't have much financial aptitude, and we don't have much time because we came December 15th. If we came September 15th, you have 3 months of studying, analyzing. So we decided that our first window is going to be much smaller because obvious reasons. We were not very much prepared months in advance. And number two, we have some changes within the squad that are happening. And number three, financially, we're thin. So we have to try within that time frame and limited options, find what is possible. Then the coach said, look, I want to play a 3 at the back, and I want to play a high intensity game far away from our goal. We have these players in our back. We're missing a lefty, and we're missing a fast player. So immediately, he gave you a player profile of some of the most important qualities that he would wish. At that time, he wasn't saying, I need somebody who will be wearing the captain's armband, somebody who, is great on the ball, somebody's great in, usually the description for center backs is make sure he's great in the air, make sure he's great on the ball, and make sure he's fast, right? And when you look at these 3 components, maybe it's Rafael Varane and Umtiti and 2-3 other guys. So you have to prioritize the qualities that you're looking for and be ready to sacrifice one for the other. So if you're looking to build components within your squad, you have to say, okay, we want a lefty that has speed. That the other 2 guys maybe are lacking in that sense, so we need that. So we went to the market, and with not much to do, we didn't have money to buy players. What we did, let's take a loan with a small option to buy something that, if proves right, the risk is not vast for us. That is also part of the sporting director decision making. What if it doesn't play out, right? A loan with option can be always returned back because the player didn't adapt, didn't suit well, etc. So when you sign a player and buy him for 3, 4, 500,000 for Hajduk, that's significant money. So you have to have a larger security into what you're looking for to add to the team. So by playing, saying, hey, I want to play 3 at the back, that makes our outside backs wing backs now. Are they competent to do that? We believe they are. What do we need up front? We need a center striker because most of our guys are attacking mids or winger profiles. So we then looked for that position in particular, what we were looking. And as that window closed, so actually not just window, we had a preseason, and in that preseason, one youngster from the academy came up. We thought, he plays as a winger in the academy. We thought, hey, he might be a very good wing back. So how do we do with this player at wing back? He came to preseason, didn't do well at wing back, but immediately put himself as a player that did well up front. So now the coach saw him as a striker, but again, it wasn't the profile of striker we needed. Then those moments are happening. Some players that you thought you can rely upon disappear. Some players that were nowhere to be found or didn't have status, they win status, they win minutes. And as a sporting director, you have to be making choices. Look, he's not going to play. Let's loan him. let's sell him. This is the right moment. If it's a player that does well, is he expiring? So we we had a situation in which we had a player that wasn't even ours, that was in Hajduk. It was with us in preseason. He was on loan with us without option to buy, and we get an offer that we take 400,000 for this player, 400,000 euros to terminate the loan. And I'm immediately, because I was a coach, I immediately thought, no, we shouldn't do it. We're going to disrupt the team chemistry. And I went to talk to the coach, and I would say, hey, how important is this player? 400,000 for us, for this player. He's not going to be here with us in July. And we're going to have new season, European games, very important for us. He said, look, if we can replace with a good enough of a player in the back line, I can move this here, and then we can cover this role. And so we took this money, we terminated our loan, went to another place, and we brought in a player to, where we were able to finally spend money for a position that was lacking. And he changed some things within the squad, in which a number 8 moved back to number 6, and we were able to cover that quite seamlessly. So these type of conversations, they are at the beginning of the window. Then you have not just the window, then before the season starts, during preseason, you have a conversation of maybe we're looking for a left back, but there is a youngster that came up. Let's not close him. We're not looking for left back anymore. So we decided we're going to push this left back, not close the opportunity for this boy to promote himself into a first teamer. So it definitely is a weekly conversation. And then when the window ends, you look at where you're at within your squad, and you really start having discussions on what we're going to be doing over the next months in order to prepare for the window starting in June time.
Yes, totally. And there you describe the reality of the needs assessment that takes place, pretty much every moment. It starts with that, right? Because the coach, even yourself as a sporting director, you can say, we need this, and that, whether it is a position or a set of skills or a particular character type. So that is for me one of the starting points. But then when we go into activities like you said, Chris, you mentioned gross tracking, net tracking. We spoke about Monchi, and if we think about those clubs who actually have a capacity, without being the PSG or the Manchester Cities of the world, they still have some funds, they have some weight in the market. They can go and attract and choose the players that they want to work with. So based on the needs that we have established, we need this, and that player within this term, within a year, within 6 months, or just right now. How do the player profiles get implemented into the scouting efforts? What would you say?
I think just to kind of elaborate a little bit as well, I can tell you a little bit the situation we have here in my club. So we appointed a new head coach internally from academy, because we wanted to make an alignment between the academy model and the first team game idea. But the academy game idea was opposite from how the first team played in the past. So the first team playing squad was built upon physical players, direct style, defending the box, and playing direct to the strikers, and then second ball game, very British game. And not to say it can be successful, for sure it can. But then if we want to, first of all, we have an American owner. We have to make money. That's his project. So how do we make money? We have to play the players from academy into the first team. They have to play well. They have to develop, and then we have to sell them. So everybody is clear about the objectives. So how do we put the players who are used to playing a build-up game, possession game, an academy into the first team, where this is a completely opposite style? So then the first thing, our new head coach, he was using a term which I like. He was calling it accelerators for our playing style. So he identified several players in the positions which we thought we might lose a player. So for example, if we lost a goalkeeper, he identified some players, left back, midfielder, whatever. But he identified a profile which he thought could accelerate the playing style to change in the short term. But when you don't get a couple of those players that you first wanted early in the window, now you have a situation later in the window where, let's say we're going for the playmaking midfielder, But if the rest of the team does not, we don't want to build up from the back with the rest of the team that we have available, then you have a decision. Do you still go for the playmaking midfield player, or can you get two ball-playing midfielders in that then you can control the build-up and control the game? Or if you can only take one, does it make sense to even bring one? Because then if he doesn't fit with the rest of the squad game idea, should we then go for a more physical profile in midfield who can play the more dynamic game, but is also good on the ball? So you're trying to find a halfway, because you're always transitioning the squad from what you had before to where you want to go. And it's never a case of you can just take one piece of the puzzle and put him in this team. You have to think about, as you mentioned, in Spain, they're talking about the collective dynamics, the relationships between players on the field. And that, we started with the idea we will sign 4 players who will change the game idea, promote from academy. We don't get any of those players. Then you have to choose this player at the end of the window, and then you're thinking he doesn't fit with what we currently have, and the idea starts to change again. So this is just a real life example that we had.
If I may add, yeah, I mean, real life example, I think, are the most enriching to hear. I always appreciated those the most in my education, and as I learn and grow, try to hear what other people had in their realities. So you asked about a specific player profile, and what is the process following that. And first, let's say we define, let's go back to that left-footed center back that we discussed. We all want guys that are good on the ball, guys that are good in the air at central defender, guys that have speed, guys that read the game well, guys that maybe are leader profiles, guys that maybe are young, guys that have the appropriate passport, guys that fit financially. So these are all part of the football descriptions, plus other things that belong in that category. And of course, you also want that psychologically that they are competitors, that they can tolerate. Let's say we were at Hajduk Split, a big club with massive fan following. Can they tolerate the pressure of playing for such a big team? Maybe they had this in their past resume, which is better if they've played for another big team in a different country or within the country. So these are all things that you have to list as part of your player profile. After that, I think the first step would be prioritize them. So make sure that, do you want the central defender to be fast? Do you want him to be good on the ball? Or do you want him to be good in the air? Which from the 3 is most needed from this position right now, considering the rest of our squad? I would say within that step, you are already closer to defining what you're looking for, and you're ready to sacrifice some of the qualities for others. Then you see what you're able to get when you cast your net with gross tracking, with nest tracking, and when you actually refine your list to, hey, here are our short list of 5 candidates, scouting team brought them to the table or the recruitment area. We give to the coach to watch. Let's see which one he likes the most that would fit. Maybe that was a method that I preferred. So how to involve the head coach, who we start with the player profile with, eventually to say, here are the 5 candidates that fit financially, age-wise, culturally, we believe that they will adapt, they speak the language, or we can communicate with them, etc., etc. Watch them footballistically, maybe even have a conversation. So I try to do that as often as possible, to speak with the player, to get a feeling for them, because sometimes all of that works. Somebody could be target number 1, you speak to them and they just sound odd, and then you go back to your intuition, as Chris mentioned, and somebody who would be number 1 falls off the list just because he didn't leave a good feeling that you would want to bring to your house, right, to your club. So anyways, let me go back to that list of qualities. Right now at Hibernian, I'm privileged to have a recruitment analyst that works along my side. So part of us defining the role of what we're looking for, it's not just philosophical or verbal in saying we want that he has speed, ball playing in the air, winning duels, reading the game, but we actually, each one of these qualities, we try to merge with some data that is present within some of the databases that are out there. So for example, if we're defining a central defender and we want him to be good on the ball, we put that as first priority. So what is his passing, forward passing in terms of quality, in terms of does he have a key pass, etc. If we say that he is good in the air, then we have to define offensively or defensively. Is he the guy that scores 4 goals a season for us? Or is he just a guy who is going to be very good at marking the opposition not to be scored against? So that enables us to create kind of a more detailed player profile where these qualities are then merged with specific information from the database. And we're able to say, out of 100% total qualities, 15% is how is his aerial game. 15% is him having speed in order to be able to cover a large ground. 15% is his playmaking capacity to go forward. Maybe 7% on penetrating passes, maybe 8% on another quality. So in that sense, you're able to even metrically come closer to the player profile you're looking for. Because if you don't have this, then looking at who are the best defenders in that league, you will get a completely different answer whether you're going to looking a defender like a stopper, or you're looking a playmaking center back that your team is looking for. You might get 2 quite opposite players ranked number 1 and 2, and 1 is totally for you and number 2 is totally not for you. But if you don't have this well defined, then you don't really, the data that you're trying to attach it to is not really that helpful as it could be.
Can I just also give a counterpoint to these detailed profiles, because a lot of clubs are doing now exactly what Ivan mentioned, and you create these data filters, which actually you can look globally now which players are, hitting these key performance indicators, and then we can look at the videos of the players later after the data, after the stats. The only concern with player profiles is that you miss other types of players who can be effective or even better. So, for example, if we take the traditional British game, and this is one of my favourite examples, because the winger in the 4-4-2 is always a guy who's fast, who can run, who can dribble and crosses the ball. And then David Beckham comes. He's not fast. He doesn't beat his opponent 1v1, but he has this technique where he bends the ball around the opponent. He can cross the ball from 30, 40 metres outside of the box without running to the line, and he's getting a lot of assists. But if you're first filtering out the player who's not quick and good 1v1, you never find David Beckham. So this is the type of situation where we have to, and I know it's like 2 different arguments, but we also have to try to stay open and fluid, because profiles are also changing. If we looked at a goalkeeper 15 years ago, we are not considering, can the goalkeeper play on the ground between the opposing midfielders, a pass to the striker. Now some goalkeepers can do this from the penalty box. They can play to the winger, they can play to the striker, they can play to the fullback, they can play under pressure like a little rondo in the box. But 15 years ago, this would have been crazy. In the United Kingdom, if you made a player profile, fullbacks now are box-to-box like midfield players used to be. Midfield players now are not box-to-box. You have specialists. You have some players who are slow and can't run, but they play number 6 and they control the ball. And sometimes I spoke about one young player recently to a colleague, and he's not very fast. He's not very sharp. And my colleague said, he's not quick on 1 or 2 meters enough to be a top player. But when you look objectively, he's always retaining the ball. He's making the good passes. He's making assists. He's doesn't lose possession. So with his qualities, he's found a way for his body to be able to achieve the objectives, and we shouldn't discount him because of that. So just wanted to add some balance also to the competition.
Yes, sorry.
Sure. No, I would say I agree 100% with Chris. It's part of your decision. Are you willing to, within your resources, to sacrifice missing a player here or there in order to get to the ones that you want quicker, right? So you have to weigh that risk. I can also give an example. Maybe now the metrics have gone really deep. They've really advanced further than they were maybe 10 years ago, in which there's expected goals, expected assists from the positions where you're located, and they are different for Instat, for StatsBomb, because from Opta, because the quality of the data is different. So I think we are seeing very nice attempts in defining football in that sense to be an aid for us. At the same time, they can be a hindrance if we don't really know what we're looking at and how to derive in good information from that data. We could easily get lost. I can give you an example. Maybe 7-8 years ago, when we talk about a youth academy setup, we didn't have such data, and most academies don't have such data on players. Such data on players for the under 17s don't really exist. So very, very much the past 15-20 years, the clubs in the youth academies have gone into testing, physical testing, as part of the recruitment. How fast is the player explosive? How much can he run? How does he do on an agility test? How does he do with some endurance test, etc. And maybe that has taken it to a different direction. We definitely recognize the value of that, but you have to then merge it with the real world. And as Chris said, those players that he mentioned are actually effective in getting the stuff done. I can give you an example of a player that, when I was in Dinamo's academy, came to us and was described as, super fast, very agile, decent technique, and he came from a big European club. When we analyzed him and we brought him in, he was cheap, not a lot of risk in terms of making a mistake, and he was described as the fastest player in the academy. So I went to watch a couple of games of that team, and he played as well. And I commented with the coach, saying, he, from what I understand, he's the fastest player. He says, yeah, he's the fastest player on the agility and on the bigger distance speed. He's the best player. He's the fastest player on the team. I said, great. He said, but he said, you would be surprised. Actually, he's the best player, also agility with the ball. So we did the same agility test, changing direction with the ball. He also was the best. I was like, wow, that's incredible, because I watch him now for 4 games and he still didn't beat anybody one-on-one. So end of the day, you had a player that had tool A, tool B, tool C, and then what we believe the most important tool, what is his impact to the game with the tools A, B, and C, which are speed, agility, and technique. He wasn't producing anything. He wasn't producing goals. He wasn't producing much crosses. He wasn't producing assists either. So quickly we realized that cannot be misled by purely physical data or some other tests, even technical tests, because if the player, end of the day, doesn't solve the problem with his skill set, that skill set is more for circus than to actually problem solve on the football field.
No, totally. Couldn't agree more. And actually, I believe most of the top end sporting directors right now, from Monchi to Victor Horta, they're speaking of the same situations, and they, of course, advocates of using big data, and they are the ones also who have come out to say that they do something very similar to what you described in terms of prioritizing and picking the right type of metrics for the position, for the type of game that is expected to play as a team, and therefore in the position and so on and so forth. That way you get some form of internal algorithm which reflects that valuation of what you want to see in players. But when they're asked about how important big data is, they say that it's only as important as the place it has in the whole effort, which is not that big. Yes, it does have a place. Yes, big data is a good place to either start when you're doing the growth tracking to see and apply the metrics, see which players come out from the massive database, or when you actually have gone through an assessment of a player, then you can check if the data matches what the subjective views are saying. But the reality is that they're all placing still a very considerable amount of importance on the subjective observation. Why? Because there are no metrics yet which can say if a player solves the problem effectively or not. There is a place for big data, but there's still a very much continuing impact of the subjective view. And I don't know about you, but I agree 100% also with the comments on how Opta from StatsBomb, and all the other providers, how they differ in the creation of event data. That doesn't make it any easier on the industry. But there's a lot of fans there of big data. And unfortunately, I think it's important to remind people that the subjective eye is still very much important because data has not yet solved everything. And I guess that's where this is an important conversation as well. Sport directors, scouts, coaches, what they see with their own eye, their own football knowledge is still very much important. And data is only a tool that has to complement that. Would you agree more or less?
I think that for every expert job, as the more time you spend on the job, especially if you are yourself looking to evolve your knowledge, you are building your own database in your head. Maybe it's subconscious, so that you don't even know you're doing it, but you're actually doing it. You are improving as a scout by watching games, by analyzing players, by asking questions to yourself, actually by seeing which player that you thought does well is actually doing well, and maybe letting the time pass 3-4 years, and somebody you thought will be a great player doesn't end up being that. Somebody that you never thought will be a good player ends up being great. So I think that disregarding that database of knowledge within a person is definitely a big mistake. So respecting that the human expertise and that element, what we end up calling it the football eye, but in reality is deep knowledge, has a significant weight in choosing the right players. I think big data can be significantly used in the moments you described, maybe gross tracking players and opening new markets where you are not available. If you have very limited resources, if you have 1 or 2 scouts, you can't cover a lot. It can trim down some new markets for you and open you up to new opportunities. On the other hand, you have to be aware of what are the limitations and where the actual knowledge of the football experts has to be respected and be given more weight than any data that is out there.
Yeah, we'll use that to try to more or less wrap up this because we could go on talking for a very long time. But I think it's a good moment to bring in questions to see if there are any questions, as we have been receiving them. Some have been answered, I believe, hopefully many of them. But for any of you watching us right now, please state again your questions if you believe that they haven't been answered, and we'll be happy to answer them. We have just right now Javier Restrepo asking, what software do we use for data analysis? Do you have anything for Javier?
So in my club currently we use Instat as our platform, Instat and Scout, those 2 platforms actually to analyze players via video and data. I can recommend some others that I've used in the past. The 21st Club is a company from London that is actually, they call themselves as intelligence officers. So people that are using data and are able to put together some software that they're using called Evolution, Acquisition, and some modules that were helpful to us in scouting and recruitment in Hajduk. We use those. Obviously, StatsBomb and Opta are other quality metrics. I have next week a meeting with another company which I don't know, but I'm open to learning about how they code and analyze things. So it's multiple services that are available there, and I hope that I listed some of them in this answer. They have different price points, and because of those different price points, they're appropriate for different level clubs that can afford them.
Yeah, we have a data analyst who's using Opta to generate statistical models, but also just to say that a lot of the biggest clubs now, or the ones who are investing a lot in data, they're actually developing, they develop their own algorithms from raw data, and they basically, what's happening is, the way Ivan described data was like a filter system. We want a player who's doing these things. Let's find a player on the data who's doing these things well. Then let's go look. But there are clubs who are using a point system to try and determine, how well players are doing. So it's to keep the answer short, how do they do this? So first you have to define different moments of the game. What makes an action more valuable than another one? Does it have more chance of leading to a goal, more percentage of, this is a very detailed answer, so I'm not going to go to all the detail, but the key thing is they create a point system to determine how good is the player. Then you have to have a point system for each league, for teams within the league, because a player on the bottom team in division will have much more defensive actions than the team on the top. So they put all this information in. They have very, very intelligent people, much more intelligent than me, who are developing the algorithms. And then they're actually trying to see, okay, here is a player who is undervalued on the market according to our data. So this is another way that clubs are using data, not only using the raw set as a filter, but trying to make mathematical models to predict, the value, the market value of a player, and compare it with the asking price from the clubs to find the undervalued player.
Yeah, that makes sense. In the end, yes, I've also worked with Instats myself at Getafe, but we also looked at Stats, which actually is a lot more expensive, but I believe also, in my opinion, more reliable too. But every provider is different. They have pros and cons, and it's a lot of shopping out in the market, right? It's whatever, number one, you can afford, and number two, what suits you better, right? There's another question by Ramandeep here, who's asking if language really matters, because clubs like Real Madrid recruit a lot of Brazilian players and most of them don't speak English or Spanish. Personally, I can tell you, being here in Madrid myself, you wouldn't believe how good players are when they're learning languages. They learn really fast and they adapt really quickly, and some of them you may not even know they already speak the Spanish. Getafe just now bought Jakub Janto, the Czech player, and to everybody's surprise, he spoke perfect Spanish. He's never been here in Spain. He's been stayed in Italy, and he spoke perfect Spanish, and that's not a problem. And players learn quite fast, and then you have the clubs like the Real Madrid, the big clubs with a lot of resources, who are very capable of helping the player learn languages. So my question to you guys is, if in your experience, with maybe less resources, that is still a problem as well?
I have to say that it really depends on the environment. I've heard many stories from my colleagues who played in Arsenal and Chelsea in the golden era, in the late 90s and early 2000s, and many French players never learned English and lived in London. So now that would be odd, but with Arsene Wenger as the head coach at Arsenal, if you have your family there, if you are within an hour or 2 hour drive with under La Manche to be in France, if you're not yourself nostalgic, maybe you don't need to go to even adapt, and it might not be a factor to somebody. And then there are other personalities who, by not understanding the language, drown completely because they're not able to immerse themselves within the team. They're not able to formalize and develop social relationships that are important. Maybe they don't have anybody and they're by themselves. They can develop depression, just feel like the lone wolf. So it does depend a lot on the personality, and that is much harder to guess what type of personality you are actually bringing to your club and how they're going to overcome that challenge, than saying, hey, let's at least make sure we can communicate to each other well. When we were at Legia, actually, we tried with several of our young players that we saw that are on a upward spiral and that they're going to be sold soon. We push them to speak English just so that they can have a better adaptation to wherever they go next. We as a club, it was in our interest if we keep 10% of their next sale to make sure that they're successful where they're at. So an investment to a teacher to teach them English, once a week or twice a week will add to their life, give them opportunity to connect somewhere, but also it could be a great return to the club if they're successful somewhere. And this element is definitely not to be disregarded. It's not as I said, with opposite examples, a yes or no, that it's a must, but at the same time, it's quite an important element we take into consideration.
Yeah, just to add, I think it's a bonus, but it's not a necessity. I think I would take a player who I think is the right player, even if they didn't speak the language. But like Ivan said, everything is depending on the culture, the context of the group. I went to work with Ivan in Croatia. I didn't speak Croatian. I didn't have family, friends there. Sometimes you go to lunch with the staff and they are speaking in Croatian and they are basically ignoring you. But then other guys in the club, they make an effort to speak in English, and I made some friends for life, in the club there. So just depends on the personality of the group and everything as well. It's more than just language.
Well, that's actually a great note to finish with. It's a great spirit in there, right? In the end, it's the case myself. I lived in Australia. Of course, I learned some English, but there's a lot of people living in different places. There's a lot of different situations where one just adapts or fails to adapt to a place for a variety of reasons. But when, people in clubs, if they're being humane, if they're being careful and genuinely interested in people, especially players, then everything works out. So I think that's a great moment to wrap up. I would like to thank you, Ivan and Chris, a lot for everything that you shared with us, and for everybody that has been with us on the other side of the screen. Thank you very much for your questions, for your participation, and for everything that we've seen via your support here. And we hope that this has been positive for you, that you have been able to take up a few notes and a few ideas about the football world, scouting, recruitment, player profiles, and we'll see you soon in any of the following events in the Real Madrid Graduate School. Thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thanks.